If you could select any version of a tennis legend in their prime, which era would you choose? The unstoppable champion collecting Grand Slams like souvenirs? The young phenom announcing their arrival to the world? Or maybe the battle-hardened veteran clinging to glory as younger rivals circle? You really can't go wrong with peak performances, but what about something different? What about the Anomaly, the season that defied logic and expectation? Without question, I'm taking 1999 Pete Sampras. His combination of struggle and dominance, vulnerability and invincibility created the most paradoxical season in tennis history. He was supposed to be declining, yet he delivered one of the greatest performances ever witnessed on a tennis court. He tied the most hallowed record in the sport while simultaneously losing the throne he'd occupied for 6 straight years. 1999. Pete Sampras was an anomaly, and this is how it happened. Entering 1999, Pete Sampras was 27 years old, an age when tennis players traditionally begin their decline. The sport is unforgiving to aging bodies, and the serve and volley game that Sampras had mastered was physically punishing. For 6 consecutive years, he'd finished the season as the world's #1 player, a streak of dominance that seemed untouchable. But cracks were beginning to show. Sampras withdrew from the Australian Open due to fatigue, choosing to skip the year's first Grand Slam entirely. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a concerning sign that the champion's body might be betraying him. When he did return to competition, the results were alarming. He failed to win a single title during the early part of the season, a drought that stretched on week after week. By the time June arrived, Sampras had managed only 11 ATP match wins. For a player accustomed to dominating the tour, this was borderline catastrophic. The tennis world began to wonder if the changing of the guard was finally happening. Andre Agassi, Sampras's greatest rival, was experiencing a remarkable career renaissance. After falling out of the top 10 and battling personal demons, Agassi had reinvented himself into a baseline powerhouse. In June, he captured the French Open, completing his career Grand Slam and proving he was playing the best tennis of his life. The narrative was clear. Agassi was ascending while Sampras was fading. But Sampras possessed something that statistics couldn't measure. His mental fortitude, forged through years of championship battles, refused to accept decline. He understood that champions aren't defined by how they start the season, but by how they respond when questioned. As grass court season approached, Sampras made a decision. He would return to the surface where he'd built his legend, where his serve became a weapon of mythical proportions, where his game flowed with natural elegance. The Stella Artois Championships at Queen's Club became his proving ground. This historic tournament served as the traditional Wimbledon warm-up, and Sampras needed it desperately. He hadn't won a title all year, and confidence in professional tennis is everything. When he stepped onto the pristine grass courts of Queen's Club, something shifted. The serve that had carried him to 5 Wimbledon titles rediscovered its devastating accuracy. The volleys became crisp again, the movement more fluid. Sampras won the Queen's Club title, and more importantly, he rediscovered his identity. He beat rising star Lleyton Hewitt in the final, announcing that reports of his demise were premature. This wasn't just another tournament victory. It was the spark that would ignite one of the most dominant stretches in tennis history. As Wimbledon approached, Sampras was no longer the struggling veteran searching for form. He was a champion who'd remembered exactly who he was, and he was hungry to prove it on the sport's grandest stage. The Anomaly was about to begin. What followed was nothing short of supernatural. Sampras embarked on a 24-match winning streak that would encompass 4 consecutive tournaments: Queen's Club, Wimbledon, Los Angeles, and Cincinnati. In an era when tennis had become increasingly competitive, when every tournament featured dangerous opponents capable of pulling upsets, Sampras simply refused to lose. For 2 months, he was untouchable. But the centerpiece of this streak, the performance that would define his career and cement his legacy, came at Wimbledon. The All-England club had always been Sampras's cathedral, the place where his game achieved its purest expression. On grass, his serve became unhittable, his volleys turned into reflex actions, and his movement bordered on telepathic. He'd already won 5 Wimbledon titles, but 1999 carried different stakes. Roy Emerson's record of 12 Grand Slam singles titles had stood for over 30 years, and Sampras entered the tournament with 11. One more would tie the record. One more would place him in rarefied historical air. The early rounds showcased Sampras at his most clinical. Against Daniel Nestor in the round of 16, he was absolutely dominant, needing just 1 hour and 20 minutes to dispatch the Canadian. Sampras struck 20 aces, won 90% of his first serve points, and never faced a breakpoint he couldn't save. It was a masterclass in grass court tennis, the kind of performance that makes opponents feel helpless before they even walk onto court. The quarterfinals presented a dangerous test against Mark Philippoussis, the Australian known for his massive serve and powerful game. Philippoussis took the first set, and for a moment, the possibility of an upset loomed. But Sampras responded with the resolve of a champion who'd seen every situation imaginable. He claimed the second set convincingly, and then Philippoussis' body betrayed him. A knee injury forced the Australian to retire, and Sampras advanced. Sometimes fortune favors the prepared, and Sampras was certainly that. The semi-final against Tim Henman became an instant classic, a match that captured everything compelling about tennis. Henman, the British hope playing in front of his home crowd, came out firing. He took the first set, and the center court crowd erupted with the kind of passion that can lift a player to unprecedented heights. But Sampras had experienced these moments before, had felt the weight of expectation and the pressure of elimination. He broke Henman early in the second set and never looked back, winning the next 3 sets to advance to the final. Standing between Sampras and history was Andre Agassi, the perfect opponent for such a momentous occasion. Their rivalry had defined an era of American tennis, two contrasting styles and personalities that elevated each other through competition. Agassi arrived at the final as the newly crowned French Open champion, playing inspired tennis and carrying momentum. The stage was set for an epic confrontation. What unfolded on July 4th, American Independence Day, was the most dominant final performance in Wimbledon history. From the opening service game, Sampras operated at a level that seemed to transcend normal tennis. His first serve was landing with surgical precision, generating so much pace that Agassi could barely get his racket on the ball. When Sampras came to net, he wasn't guessing, he was reacting with the kind of instinctive brilliance that can't be taught. The statistics tell a story of absolute mastery. Sampras struck 16 aces, but more impressively, he won 89% of his first serve points. Think about that ratio. Nearly 9 out of every 10 times Sampras got his first serve in play, Agassi couldn't win the point. Sampras saved all 4 break points he faced, never allowing Agassi a foothold in the match. He won 73% of his service points and 57% of total points in a match where both players were at their absolute best. The final score read 6-3, 6-4, 7-5, a straight sets victory that took just 1 hour and 55 minutes. After the final point, Sampras collapsed to the grass in pure emotional release, his arms spread wide as if embracing the sky itself. He'd done it. 12 Grand Slam titles, tying Roy Emerson's legendary record. At 27, when he was supposed to be declining, Pete Sampras had just delivered arguably the greatest performance of his career. Victory at Wimbledon should have been the beginning of a triumphant second half of the season. Sampras was riding a winning streak that showed no signs of stopping, and with his confidence soaring, more Grand Slams seemed inevitable. But professional tennis operates by a cruel logic, one that doesn't pause for celebration or allow champions to rest on their achievements. The very next day after his Wimbledon triumph, the ATP rankings were updated, and Sampras was no longer the world's #1 player. Andre Agassi, by virtue of his French Open title and consistent performances throughout the year, took over the top ranking. For the first time in 6 years, Sampras would not finish the season as the world's best player. The mathematics were simple but painful. While Sampras had saved his best tennis for Wimbledon, Agassi had been excellent throughout the entire season. The ranking system rewards consistency over peaks, and Agassi had earned the top spot. Sampras didn't allow the rankings to diminish his accomplishment. He continued his winning streak through Los Angeles and Cincinnati, capturing both titles and pushing his streak to 24 consecutive match victories. This wasn't just good tennis, it was historically great tennis. In those 2 months from Queens Club through Cincinnati, Sampras had played at a level few players ever reach. But the human body has limits that even the strongest cannot overcome. A herniated disc in his back, likely aggravated by the physical demands of his winning streak and the violent serving motion that defined his game, began causing serious problems. At the RCA Championships, Sampras was forced to retire from the tournament. unable to continue competing through the pain. More devastating still, the injury forced him to withdraw from the US Open entirely. The season that had promised so much glory was ending, not with triumph, but with the harsh reality of physical limitation. By year's end, Sampras had managed to compete in only 13 ATP tournaments, his lowest total in a decade. He finished the year ranked third, behind Agassi and Yevgeny Kafelnikov. His streak of 6 consecutive years finishing as the world's #1 player, a record that may never be equaled, had come to an end. In any other season, this would be viewed as failure. But 1999, Pete Sampras defied conventional evaluation. He'd withdrawn from the Australian Open, struggled through the early season with barely double-digit wins, then erupted into a 2-month period of absolute dominance that produced one of the greatest Grand Slam performances in tennis history. He'd tied a record that had stood for 3 decades while simultaneously losing the ranking he'd owned for 6 years. He was vulnerable and invincible, declining and dominant, human and superhuman. He was an anomaly, and that Wimbledon performance remains the gold standard for perfection on a tennis court. Sometimes greatness isn't measured by year-end rankings or season-long consistency. Sometimes it's captured in a single fortnight where a champion reminds the world exactly who they are.